Hey guys, Brett Weiss here. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for hitting that subscribe button that's just below the video and to the right. I really appreciate it. Today I'm going to be talking about video game controllers, namely my favorite controller of all time. Now this is based on a question by a patron to my Patreon page by the name of Pete Noel, but the answer is for all you guys. So he asks, which gaming controller do you like best? It has to be one that comes with the console, not third-party ones or add-ons like the Atari's driving controllers. Now, my favorite console of all time might surprise you. I'm definitely an old-school gamer, so stay tuned for a few minutes and I will reveal what my favorite controller of all time was. But I thought it'd be fun to go through some of the history of controllers and just some different ones I have that I like and just some of the more mainstream controllers for different consoles. So let's start off in 1977 with the Atari 2600. Now this is an iconic controller, very familiar to most of you guys with the simple, single button and the joystick. And people were used to playing joystick-based games in the arcade, so Atari went this route with the joystick. It's a different controller, much different than the previous systems that preceded the 2600, the Magnavox Odyssey, the RCA Studio 2, and the Fairchild Channel F. The Atari 2600 joystick is quite a bit different than that, and you grab it by the base, and it's kind of a thick base, and after you've been playing for a long time, your hand can kind of cramp, but the fire button is responsive, and like I said, the joystick's a little stiff, but it is responsive, and it works for the majority of the games pretty well. I like the 2600, and there were a lot of, if you didn't want to go with the regular joystick, there were a lot of third-party joysticks for the console, including my favorite, the Wico ball-top joystick, which gives you a button on top and here, either one. You can set it for the base or the stick, whichever feels most comfortably pushing the button. But again, it's got a large, bulky base, and your hand can cramp after a long time of playing. Sometimes I like to use, when I'm playing Atari 2600, a game like Space Invaders or Demon Attack, where you're just moving a ship along the bottom of the screen. Sometimes I like to use a Sega Genesis controller. Here's my 6-button Genesis controller, which was a nice advance over the 3-button Genesis controller, especially for fighting games, because you could have a different move mapped to each button. Worked out much better that way. It's smaller than the 3-button, so if you've got really big hands, you might like the Sega Genesis 3-button controller better, but I really like the Genesis controller, the 6-button. It's very sleek, and I love the options of having all 6 buttons. Works out really well, especially for fighting games. But again, not my favorite controller of all time. So let's look at a few others. After the Atari came out, of course, there was the Intellivision. The Intellivision went a completely different route than the joystick, with the 16-direction control disc, which was kind of odd, and 17 buttons total, including the keypad and the side buttons, for shooting or whatever. And this controller is kind of hit and miss. It works really well for some games like Astro Smash and Beauty and the Beast. Not so well for others like Pac-Man. Yes, Pac-Man did come out for the Intellivision. Not as common a version as Pac-Man as for the NES and Atari 2600, but it just didn't, it's not great for just real tight cornering and stuff, but it's an okay controller and I like it for a lot of the games, but nowhere near my favorite. And one thing I like about it, as you can see, it's hardwired into the console, and when the Intellivision 2 came out, which was a smaller unit, it came out with detachable controllers, which was much better because if your controller broke, you didn't have to get, take the whole console in or mail it in or whatever to get repaired. You could just switch out the controller, which was much better. Always thought hardwired controllers were kind of strange. Like for the Odyssey 2, the Odyssey 2 was kind of a bulky joystick, as you can see here. It's hooked to my system over here. Again, it's a bulky base to hold, and it works pretty well. I like it for most of the games. It's a pretty good controller, but again, hardwired. There was a model of the Odyssey 2 where the controllers were detachable, but that model unit is very, very hard to find. You almost never see that one, and I'm sure it would be expensive if you did find it. So the Odyssey 2 controller, not bad, but nowhere near my favorite. So let's move ahead a little bit to the ColecoVision. Now, I really like the ColecoVision controller. A lot of people don't like it because of the bulk of the stubby joystick, you know, you can see it's shorter than most other joysticks, and it's just kind of stubby, and maybe some people don't like that it's not just a stick, it's got that kind of disc on top. But anyway, I like it because, you know, I got, most of you know, my first system was a ColecoVision that I actually owned back in 1982 for Christmas, and I just grew up playing this console, and the controller works great to me. The side buttons can get a little hand cramping. You know, if you're pushing them fast and, you know, over a long period of time, it can get a little hand cramping. I like the keypad. It works great for games like Mousetrap. Anyway, big fan of the ColecoVision controller, but again, not my favorite. Since some people didn't like the stubby joystick, some companies did make some items to sort of maybe change that a bit. Like, for example, this joystick, these were sold separately. You could just buy one of these in a blister pack and sort of turn your ColecoVision controller into a more proper joystick. These are pretty rare. I've showed these to several people that have been gaming for a very long time that have never seen them. I saw them one time. I think I got them new in the store in the blister packs. Haven't really seen them available anywhere since, but it works pretty well. It works as a good joystick, and I use this a lot of times when I play ColecoVision. I also have this modded ball top ColecoVision joystick that works pretty well. I won that in a tournament at the Oklahoma Video Game Expo, put on by the late, great Brad Prowitz, who's very missed at the Oklahoma Video Game Expo. All right, moving forward, we're going to go to one of the greatest controller breakthroughs of all time, the Nintendo NES controller. Now, every controller that came out before the NES, I feel like had some kind of issue, some problem. Maybe it was too stiff, like with the 2600, or it was a control disc, like the Intellivision was kind of weird. Again, every controller for every console had some issue, but not the NES. This is a great controller. It's very simple to use. You've got two convenient action buttons. You've got select and start will pause most games. And the D-pad, which was a revolutionary addition to controllers. Now, the D-pad, it has its background in the handheld Game & Watch games put out by Nintendo. That's where that comes from, but it works great as a console controller. Just, you know, up, down, right, and left, and if you push in between them, you can do diagonal on a lot of games, and it just works really well. It's very accurate with most games. I love the NES controller, and it was a major breakthrough. Playing Super Mario Brothers for the first time when I got it, Christmas of '87, just phenomenal. Not only was it a revolutionary game, which a lot of people talk about, but the controller was revolutionary as well. And just a fantastic controller. And Nintendo improved on that even more with the Super Nintendo controller. It's got rounded edges, so it's a little more comfortable. It's got shoulder buttons, so you got more versatility. It's got 4 action buttons instead of just 2. And again, it's got a great D-pad controller. And it's just excellent. One of my favorite controllers of all time, but not my favorite. So let's see what else we've got here. Let's go back a little bit to the infamous Atari 5200 controller. Now, when the 5200 system came out, it was exciting because, you know, you had Pac-Man and Defender and Super Breakout and all these games, Joust, all these great games that had better graphics than their Atari 2600 counterparts. But the controller was a step backwards because of the infamous non-centering joysticks, which made games like Pac-Man and Miss Pac-Man and some others a pain to play. It just didn't corner that well. Not very accurate. The side buttons, they were okay. The keypad was okay, and it does have a pause button built right into the controller, which the 2600, ColecoVision, and Intellivision didn't have. Some of those games have pause, but a lot of them don't. And so it was great that you could pause every Atari 5200 game. But these controllers are also fragile. My friend Delph Meek repairs a lot of these for Game Over video games, that Texas-based chain, because he sees there's a lot that break down over time. And I use the regular 5200 controller for some games. It works okay for Pingo, and it works really well for games like Centipede and Missile Command, where you have more free-floating control. But I've got a Atari 5200 trackball that I use those games for. So you know, it's pretty pointless to use this for those games when you have a trackball, which, you know, works much better. So anyway, the 5200 controller, infamous, definite failure, and it hurt that system a lot in terms of sales. Now, there were some remedies for the failed Atari 5200 controller, like the Wico joystick, which you could use in place of the Atari 5200 controller, which came with a keypad. You know, there you go. You've got a great Atari 5200 joystick with the keypad. Unfortunately, today these are very hard to find. There's a couple of other options like this that are from other companies that are even more harder to find than Wico. And there's also the Master Play 5200 interface, which let you plug in Atari 2600 games to your controllers to your 5200 unit, so you could play a lot of Atari 5200 games with the Atari joysticks. So that was pretty cool. But once again, this is very hard to find. So the 5200 was pretty much a failure joystick-wise, and the remedies for that are tough to find. So let's see, what do we have now? Let's get to my favorite joystick, my favorite controller for any console of all time, and that is the PlayStation 1 DualShock controller. The PlayStation 1 DualShock controller. Absolutely love this. It was a nice upgrade of the regular PlayStation controller because it added these double joysticks. And not only did this let you have like joystick control over games, it lets you do dual movement for some games, like say Smash TV or Ape Escape. It worked perfectly with those games. Ape Escape was created for the double joysticks. Smash TV was a arcade port that lets you have excellent free range motion, so you could move in one direction and fire with the other direction in that game. It is excellent. I still have a PlayStation 1 hooked up to my to a TV in my game room here, and for a lot of reasons, just to play Smash TV. So this is an excellent controller. I absolutely love it. It also works great for like 3D hack and slash games. This joystick just works great for 3D movement. It's got shoulder buttons similar to the ones on the Super Nintendo, and the 4 buttons on the controller work similarly to the D-pad on the NES. Same basic concept, although they are separate buttons. And these iconic buttons now, the triangle, the circle, the square, and the X, gives you a lot of variability when you're playing a game. Some of the games can get complicated with the controls, but I absolutely love this controller, my favorite of all time. It feels really comfortable in my hands, and it's very comfortable. I even like it better than they came out with the DualShock 2 for the PlayStation 2. Now I have a boxed one because when Radio Shack was going out of business, I went and checked out the sales, and I got this one for dirt cheap. I think it was like $10 when Radio Shacks were going out of business. So I bought one just to keep in case I play my PlayStation 2 a lot. It's my favorite modern system. I consider the modern era PS2 to the present. I do like this a lot, but for some reason, it just doesn't feel quite as good as the PS1 DualShock. The buttons don't seem quite as sure, and it just doesn't feel quite the same in my hands. It may just be a mental thing, I don't know, psychosomatic or whatever, but for whatever reason, that PS1 DualShock controller I just absolutely love for just about any game for the PS1. All right, a couple of other controllers I like quite a bit. I like the PS4 controller. This gold model is really sharp. It feels good in my hands. It's it feels comfortable, and the button placement is pretty similar to the DualShock, the old PS1 and PS2 DualShocks. Great controller. One problem is when I set it down, it's so fragile. Sometimes it'll push a button just when I lay it on the couch, and it'll like fast forward a movie I'm watching or something. But anyway, it's a good controller. Also a shout out to the GameCube controller. A lot of people love the GameCube controller. It's a really comfortable one, and it's such a great advance over the Nintendo 64 controller. It's got a much better little joystick here than that really loose one on the Nintendo 64. Anyway, there's a look at some, pretty mainstream controllers throughout history of gaming, and including my favorite of all time, the PlayStation 1 DualShock. Love that. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. And again, this question was provided by Pete Noel. Now, you guys, anybody can ask me questions anytime on Twitter. It's at Brett Weiss, CHVG. I may not make a video of it, but patrons at the $8 mark or higher can ask questions. A couple of times a month, I will answer questions from patrons. And thank you, Pete Noel, for this question. It's awesome. And also with my Patreon page, which is at www.patreon.com/Brett Weiss, you can find digital books and magazines, exclusive videos, advanced book chapters, behind-the-scene photos and info, and much, much more. It is Once again, www.patreon.com/BrettWeiss. I really think it's a good page because you get a lot of content for just as low as $1 a month. If you pay $1 a month, you get some of the content. $3 a month will get you most of the content, and then $8.25 a month will get you some really exclusive content, some very special content, including some exclusive videos. I want to thank a new patron, Golden Galaxies Gaming. Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching, and thank you for subscribing. I will talk to you guys later. Peace out.